Well, good morning, church. I hope everybody's doing okay. Today is going to be a blessing, not only for us as individuals, but I believe as a church as a whole. We've been in a series called Letters to the Church, where we've been looking at Paul's writing to individual churches, and we are taking a slight break from that, but we're still talking about one of Paul's letters. Paul had a plea for the church that the church should act like Christ. In every single letter that he wrote to different individual churches, he always ended with the desire for them to be more like Jesus and to serve their neighbors. So today, we're gonna look at Paul's letter and his teaching that he gave to Timothy. But specifically, a part of that letter, which kind of involves the entire thing, which is church leadership, or specifically elders. And this is a very, very important teaching for our church because up to this point, we don't have any local elders. We've had area minister elders that have prayed for us and have guided this church to make sure that no matter what we do, it is approved by them that it's going to go towards Jesus, that us as a staff aren't doing anything selfish or trying to elevate our own standards, but we're just trying to reach people for Christ and to make that sure that happens over and over again. And this teaching is something we're going to go back to over and over and over again as the years go on for our church. And it's equally important for everybody in here to know and to understand this teaching as well. That when it comes to church leadership and it comes to elders, we need to make sure that every single person in here has a good explanation and biblical teaching around it. Because many people have never heard a sermon surrounding elders. Most people, if you were to ask people, they would think that the elders are the old men of the church that just kind of lurk around. You don't really know who they are, or maybe you know them, but you don't really know what they do. You might think that they're the ones that make all the decisions, that they deal with all of the money, they put together the budget, or they're just in charge of the church. Or the government just tells every not-for-profit to have a board, and we just appoint some people there, and we slap a biblical name on it and be like, those are the guys, or those are the people. And that's kind of what people think. But as soon as something bad happens in the church, who do we point to? We're like, it must be their fault, right? And that's kind of the way that it works. See, some people treat church leadership kind of like our state representatives, that if there's something going on wrong in your life, you just call them to complain. Have you ever seen those commercials that it's like, have you feel like you've been wronged? Well, call your local state representative to get it changed. See, a lot of the time we kind of treat it like that if something's going on in your life or something's going wrong in the church, it's just like, let's just call and complain. That there's term limits, there's party leaders, and there's voting. But here's the thing. That if we as a church revolve our church around those ideas, that this is what's going to be the output. Number one, it's going to make eldership look like a position that's higher than everybody else and everyone should strive to be. That if you don't become an elder, then you've missed your opportunity as a leader. Number two, it makes eldership look like a position of power. Like if you have that, then you can push people around, you can make decisions, you can affect people's lives. And number three, it makes elders look like they're trying to get votes. Like the reason that they're doing something good for somebody else is just they're trying to win a popular vote. And number four, if those things happen, it has the ability to attract the wrong type of people. So my question that I want to try to answer today is, who are the type of people that we want as elders at Elevate Christian Church? Or a better question, what picture does the Bible give of somebody who is an elder? Bible trivia for you guys. Most of the time when we talk about elders, if you've ever studied elders before, what book do you immediately flip to find out what the qualifications of an elder is? Yes, there you go, 1 Timothy. Well done. Thank you, Colby. I appreciate you. Thank you for visiting our church. Who was that? Oh, you guys sound just alike. Dang. Colby, I appreciate you. I love you. Thank you so much. Anyways, yes, 1 Timothy, that is something that we immediately just flip to. Okay, elders. We need overseers. We need elders. Let's flip right to there. Let's figure it out. But I think that in order to understand why in the world Paul wanted to take an Old Testament idea of elders and place it in a New Testament church post-Jesus, what is the purpose of that? And the way that we find that out is by going to the original way that elders were put in. The very first place that you see elders in the Bible that are in relation to God's people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, whatever you want to call them, the Jews, they pop up in the second book of the book of Exodus. And if you guys know the Exodus story, it's God's people were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. You guys might know that. And God did not like that. He does not like slavery. He does not like the enslavement of his people, especially for how long they were enslaved for. And God found a guy named Moses. We know Moses. We've heard this story before. And he put him alongside of his brother, and he said that he wanted to take God's people, the ones that were enslaved, remove them from Egypt, and put them in a new land. And this was the instructions that he gave to Moses. He said, "Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, and I have observed you in what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will take you up out of affliction of Egypt in the land of Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey.'" And the reason that God gathered together them, and specifically the elders, is because the elders have influence. And they don't have influence because they have a lot of money or they're successful. It doesn't mention that. But they have influence because they're consistent. They don't waver on what's going on in their life. They have lived through a lot of life. They know what's on the other side of pain. God's people are individuals. They all have decisions that they can make, and they all have jobs, and they're all doing things. But when the elders move, or when the elders make a decision, that meant something. See, as the story unravels and you get a little bit more information on what the elders can do or what they're supposed to do, after Moses gets out of Egypt and he goes towards the land that's flowing with milk and honey, it's natural when you take people out of their comfort zones, they start to get a little frustrated. They start to feel uncomfortable. They start to find problems that aren't really problems, especially if that group of people that you remove from Exodus, in Exodus, is over 2 million people. You can imagine the problems that they were going to come up over and over and over again. That these people actually started to become so impatient that they started to long for their time in slavery once again. That even though they weren't in slavery, nobody was over them, no one was beating them or torturing them or anything, they thought it was easier because there was uncertainty in the land. And this is what they did. They were complaining. They said, "Oh, what meat we had in Egypt. We remember fish we ate in Egypt. That cost nothing. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at." So what God did as the people started to kind of get frustrated is he gathered 70 men of the elders of Israel. So out of 2 million plus, he gathered 70 of them. And God appointed these men to take some of the burdens of Moses. So he didn't have to address every single person individually or every single people group individually, but he could spread not his own words, not Moses' words, but he could spread God's words as fast as possible to make sure all 2 million people were directed towards what? Not frustration, but towards God. And this is what God did. So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord, and he gathered 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around a tent. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke to him, and took some of the Spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. And as soon as the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied. But they did not continue doing it. See, prophesied or prophecy in Hebrew is really important to understand. What that means is God would reveal his word to them. And then they immediately took that word that God told them and they gave it to other people. That's all it was. They could go to God, God would tell them information, they would go to the people and tell. That is all a prophet did in the Old Testament. So it was to this point, it was up to Moses to do all of that work. To go to God, we see him go to God in the mountain or in the tent, and everybody would come around that tent and just wait for Moses to come out. And when he came out, he took his time and went through all 2 million plus people to make sure they understood what God had for them. But this time, it was a little different. Instead of just Moses going to tent, 70 elders came in there. And now, instead of just Moses hearing the words of God, from God himself, now all of these elders could hear the words from God directly. And then they could spread out to make sure people were following God. So up to this point, elders were men who have lived. They experienced life. They stayed faithful. They had influence, and they had the ability to receive God's word and tell people what that word was and encourage them to follow that word. What, in the modern day, what does that sound like? Sounds like a pastor, right? That sounds like a preacher, of an individual that just prays, reads this word, and then goes in front of people and says, hey, we should follow this word. That's all it sounds like. It sounds like a minister, a shepherd. If you've been to a different church, a bishop. Some people like to use the word reverend. And it sounds like a coincidence here. Like, why are elders and pastors? I thought that they were different for all of this time. Like, I've known some pastors, I've known some elders, but it's not a coincidence. This is God's plan for not only leading his people, but it has been his plan since the beginning to lead his church. So to understand what this means for us in the New Testament, and a New Testament church post-Jesus, let me introduce you to the context of the church of Ephesus. This is where this whole teaching comes around. This was a very influential town. Ephesus is like modern-day Turkey area, and this was such an influential town because it was a port town. So they had a lot of different ships coming in and out, a lot of people coming in and out, and this church was super influential because they met a lot of people, and they realized that if they told people about Jesus, those people were eventually going to leave, and then more people were going to learn about Jesus. This church in Ephesus was a very, very important church. But not only that, people came here to Ephesus for different reasons. There was a couple different temples there that were original to the town of Ephesus. There's the temple of Artemis, which the temple's not really there anymore, but there's like a stake and outline, like temple of Art. It once was there. People still go there and learn about it to this day. There was a different homes of gods and goddesses that they would have taught in Greek culture that were specifically started in that town. So you had people that were in love with Jesus coming to Ephesus to learn more about Jesus, and you had a bunch of people that were Greek learning individuals going to worship their gods and goddesses in this same town. So you can imagine what could have happened here. So Paul, loving this church, kind of heard about there is some different type of issues going on in this church, and he wanted to address those issues. So here's the issues. There's 5 of them. Hear me when I talk about these. So there was men that were obsessed with genealogies, which, is anybody here obsessed with genealogies in the Old Testament? Do you just go home and you're like, man, I cannot wait? And you go and you read all of those names and how long they lived and how many kids they had? Yeah, me either. Anyways, these guys were obsessed with genealogies. And they were so obsessed that they became enraged with one another. They fought over genealogies. I've never had a fight over genealogies, but these guys did. So much so that during the Sunday gathering, they would have to stop Sunday gathering because these men were fighting over genealogies. Number 2, these men got in their heads that they needed to follow part of the law. And they made up a little bit about Greek culture. They believe that they should go back to only eating certain foods, which we've learned about before. That's a common thing that we saw in these churches. But also they took some Greek teaching, and they were trying to convince people not to get married. That if you wanted to be whole and you wanted to be holy, don't get married, don't have kids. Number 3, the women of the church dressed so nice. They desired to dress so nice that everybody looked upon them with ooh and ah, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but if they were starting to look down upon the ladies who could not afford really nice things. So they would talk bad about them and cause division in the church. And they say, oh, why can't you wear as nice things as me? And they just started to really separate the people of the church. And the last thing was this. The last thing was that there were widows in the church, and we're supposed to take care of our widows. And the rich widows, there are rich widows and poor widows. And the rich widows were going to the churches and taking all of the resources when they didn't need it and leaving the poor widows with nothing. And on top of that, those rich widows were going around sleeping with and manipulating all the younger men. And that's all in 1 Timothy. The early church was wild, y'all. Like, that's a lot going on. And obviously none of that's okay. Like, nobody manipulating anybody's okay. People dressing nice and looking down upon people who don't have as like fancy stuff and gold. Like, that's ridiculous. We see that in American church today. We don't let people teach Greek mythology on stage. We're not obsessed with genealogies whatsoever. But you can imagine just the turmoil and the frustration that was going on in this thing. And Timothy, Paul gave a letter to Timothy with the goal of trying to get these people to follow the gospel. So the question is, man, how do you fix a church like that? When there's all those issues going on, there's a lot of big issues in those 5 things. You can even label 6 if you talk about the widows, what they were doing with the young men. That's a lot of issues in that church. See, if a church was doing that in America, what would happen? Everyone would leave. They would just label that church as a sinking ship, and everybody would leave. And we've seen a lot of different churches happen at that time. And right now in the United States, if you were to ask a minister, like, what would you do about that church? They would answer probably in 2 ways. They would say, you don't. You don't fix it. You just let it die and you let it go away, and maybe another church will take its spot. Or they say, bring in a really powerful a hardball preacher that can point out all the bad people, and they would just eventually leave, right? Because the bad people don't have any power. They don't have any more influence. But basically, you're doing the exact same thing. You're killing a church, and all these people are just going to be scattered throughout, and nobody was taught anything about Jesus, and everybody leaves, and everybody's frustrating, which is basically just starting all over in the first place. But there is one way to cut through all of that in Paul's eyes that actually will work. In 1 Timothy 1:5, this is Paul's charge to Timothy. He said this, the aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and good conscience and a sincere faith. See, Paul does not want Timothy to go to this church with frustration and going to use Jesus' words like flipping tables and all of these things so that Timothy benefits. No, all of it is for one purpose and one person only, which is to love. So how do you have a pure heart? There's only one way to do that, which is following Jesus. How do you have a good conscience? You follow Jesus for Jesus' sake, not your own. How in the world do you have sincere faith? By believing what Jesus actually says to be true and really important, and not manipulating people. So instead of Timothy going to Ephesus and yelling and kicking all of these people out to make people feel inferior to the leaders, what he's done is he's sought out and encouraged to teach good theology, to make sure everyone had a pure heart and a good conscience and sincere faith. He wants those men and women that are doing those terrible things, that are fighting, that are hurting each other, that are manipulating each other, that are taking care of poor widows, you name it. He wants all of them to be reconciled to the gospel. He doesn't want them to leave the church. So you can boil it down to this. Elders know this. Elders know God's word. They teach and they encourage others to believe and follow Jesus. That is the goal of elders. And anything else will just cause division in the church. And when I read that in 1 Timothy and throughout the Bible, you're like, man, sign me up for that. Man, I can get behind that. if you can guarantee that elders of the church will go to every single person, and their goal is to reconcile them back to the gospel, to have sincere faith, man, sign me up today. That's what I want for my family. That's who I want raising my kids. That's who I want pushing everybody in this church to do one thing, which is to make sure people follow Jesus. So at Elevate, how do we make sure this happens? As our church continues to grow, we add more families, we add more people. How do we accomplish this? What is God's way of doing it? Well, Paul gave instructions. We'll go back to the beginning of the sermon in 1 Timothy 3. And he talked about, he calls them overseers. This is the very first line. This saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. And if we stop right there just real quick, the word for overseer is episkopos. You don't have to say it. I probably said it wrong, but that's what it is. And this is what it is. If you look at the definition of this Greek word, this is what it is. It's an overseer, it's an elder, it's a bishop, it's a minister, it's a pastor, a guardian. It is someone who hits the mark. And this is really important for us to understand. Because look, what Paul is trying to tell us and telling us to understand that all of these titles that we see under this term, episkopos, all of these terms, they all fall and they're all equal to the title of pastor. There's no difference between the title of pastor, the title that I hold, and the title of elder. They're the exact same thing. So to help our mind understand this, in our American church, the good question to ask if someone wants to be an elder or someone thinks that they could be an elder, the question is this: can you do the job of a pastor? And I ask it that way, but it should be the opposite. It should be, if somebody could be an elder, you could ask them, could you be a full-time pastor? But just the way that our churches have been over the past hundreds of years in America, the question that we really need to ask is, if there's an elder, or if there's somebody that wants to be an elder, can they do the job of a pastor? Because up to this point, so far, we have separated that we've said, some people are called to be pastors. I was like, okay, if you're not called to be a pastor, well, maybe then you can just have a normal job and you can be an elder. And you've probably met some people like, man, you'd be a great pastor. Maybe some of you have told some young people that. And you've said, well, maybe you can't be, but may you be a great elder someday. But here's the thing, and my plea to us as a church and our understanding of this is that I want to make sure that we merge these terms and these people group back together just like they did in 1 Timothy. I suggest in our minds we do our best to marry these. Because as soon as we separate them, we're going to have different expectations for both people. And we're going to get frustrated with some, and we're going to point our fingers at some, and it's like, oh, it's the elder's fault, it's the pastor. And that is not the way to do it at all. So he goes on to say, these are the type of people that should be elders. Starting in verse 2, it says this: therefore, an overseer should be above reproach, a husband of one wife, sober-minded, meaning they don't get distracted. They can go to every situation with an ability to look at people the way that they are without distortion. They're self-controlled. They have the ability to follow Jesus, and they don't waver to the left and to the right. They don't get excited about things that pop up in their life, and they don't just jump over to something just because there's a new shiny thing in front of them. They're respectable. They're hospitable. They invite people in. Nobody's a stranger. They're able to teach, meaning they can open up this word and they know the word and they can teach what's in here. They are not drunkard, not violent, but they are gentle, meaning when they go into a certain situation, they don't go and try to divide people, but they gently move people over time to be more like Jesus. They're not quarrelsome. They don't try to fight. They don't gossip. They don't look for things to divide people to make themselves feel better or to point to a certain situation to come to a certain conclusion. They're not lovers of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. If someone does not know how to manage his own household, how can he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up and conceited and fall in the condemnation of the devil. He must not be a recent convert, because we see a lot of people in the church that have a lot of talent and a lot of love, but over time they fall away just so slightly because of something, a death in the family, a loss of a job, a frustration, and they kind of disappear for a while. These people have lived life, have suffered, and seen what's on the other side of suffering. Moreover, he must be well thought of outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into the snare of the devil. We need this person to be looked upon well in their own business. That if somebody says, hey, I want to go to Elevate Christian Church, and they look at the list of elders, they don't think of all the bad things or bad reputation that they have around the city. So when you read all of this, it's important to see that Paul didn't tell Timothy, hey, you see this list? You see this list of things? Go create those men. Like, go train them to be this person. He doesn't say that. He says, go find the people that are already doing this. Go find the people that fit this criteria. They're already doing this. Like, now put them in charge of people, because you know that they're going to direct people towards Jesus. They're not going to try to separate people or try to kick people out. So what we've done in our church so far, if you remember at the beginning of the year, some of you guys were here, I said that the one change we're going to do for our church this year is at some point during the year, we are going to bring on elders in leadership. And I also said it could take a bit, and it's been 7 months, so we're doing our best. And this is good, because whenever I had that conversation and I brought it up, and some of you all saw it online, and it started to bring up conversations in the room. And most of you said, I already thought we had elders. And I was like, oh, really? Question for you. Who do you think they are? And you guys are suckers. You told me right off. You didn't hold it. You didn't make me buy you coffee. Man, I would have went out. I would have bought you a steak dinner to find out that information. But you just freely gave it to me, and that's why I love you guys so much. But I had like 30 adults come up and say that exact words. I had somebody yesterday say it to me. I already thought we had elders, and you would be mind blown to believe that every single person that said that named the same people. So I went a step further, and I went to some of the leaders of our church, people who didn't come up and freely give that information, and I tried to not pay for coffee or steak, so I just asked the question. I said, hey, if we had elders, who do you think they'd be? And without hesitation, they gave me the names, and you wouldn't believe that they gave the exact same names. They give the exact same names as the people who just freely gave me the names before. And I said this 7 months ago, and we've been talking about elders in the first place. And this is my saying, what Paul has said. Look, elders are going to eld. That's what I say. That's not biblical. I might trademark that at some point. I might get a shirt. Just like if you've ever met a pastor that doesn't go to our church, pastors are going to pastor. If you're going through something and you meet a pastor on the road, man, they are going to stop, and they're going to love you. They're going to encourage you. They're going to pray for you. That's what they do. The thing is that they're going to look for you, they're going to love you, and they're going to gently guide you back to following the commands of Jesus. Not the commands that they say, but the commands of Jesus. So there's two men that we have prayerfully considered and And I'm going to ask those two men to come up. And these are the two names that you gave us. One is Dennis Truesdell, and the other is Tim Wheaton. And both of these men I've known for a very long time, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter how long I've known them. These are not the men that I have forced anybody to believe. I honestly just went to you all and said, who's the elders? And these are the guys that you called to be your elders. So anytime that something is going on in our church, you guys look to them without even realizing. The guys that you talk to that when you're going through a rough time or you need prayer, these are the guys that you went to. And without sounding like a complete creep, I have been watching for 7 months. Drew has been watching for a long time. People outside of our church assume that these guys were already elders. So the thing about both of these guys, they've already been elders at other churches. So this doesn't mean it. This isn't like a super get on your knees and pray. You've already done it. You've already been doing ministry. Your jobs are already ministry. So all I ask, and I hope that these guys have my back, is I just asked for you guys to continue to guide us towards Jesus. That being a pastor is hard. There's a lot of hurting people out here. And I love these guys. I love this church. And I ask you to help me make sure that these guys follow Jesus. Drew can come out as well. No, visitors that come, Drew is now known as the guy with the big beard. I've had a lot of people say that. His name's Drew. You don't get a mic yet. Sorry. You want me to take it from you? Dang it.
Kind of. There we go.
I'm going to dock your pay. I see you with that tablet. I told you not till I'm done. That's a lie. I made all that up. Here's the thing. These are your elders. And I promise you one thing, that this isn't a voting thing. This isn't a power thing. These are men that want to serve with the one goal of making sure that everybody follows Jesus. That if something's going on your right and you have anger, they want to teach you to pray. If you have any sin in your life, they want you to reconcile and to stop following the way that you're going, and they don't want you to leave. They want you to follow Jesus because Jesus is where healing is. These are the guys that want you to have a sincere faith and want you to trust that what Jesus says in the scriptures will actually bring the healing in life that it says that it will bring you. So what I want to do is I want to pray for our church. I want to pray for our leadership. I want to pray for the next part of our year as more things hopefully will unravel as our church continues to grow and we have more people come in. So God, as we continue to grow as a church, as we continue to have new families join, new individuals join, as we have more people that are going to come that are just trying to figure out how to have peace in their life, God, we believe that the only way to have that in life to the full is by following Jesus. And I pray over these guys that they never lose sight of that. That they do the one thing that God instilled in the elders back all the way in the Old Testament, which is you have the ability to look at the Bible and see the commands of God. And I want you to follow them. And I want you to go to the people, and I want you to teach them to follow God as well. God, these people have the title of elder, but they are pastors. They are guardians. These are the guys that hit the mark. These are the guys that look like Jesus. God, I pray as we continue to go down the narrow path together, I pray that we empower each other, and we love each other, and we value our neighbor above ourselves, because it takes an entire church to have one person believe in Jesus. God, give us the strength to move forward. God, and I ask a very specific and selfish prayer. Please bless Elevate Christian Church and its people. Bless them. Empower them. Heal them. And do all of that so that they can go out for the sake of others and reach more people in Lexington and the greater Lexington area for one purpose, which is for Jesus and nothing else. God, you are so good. And we ask this all in your Son's name. Amen.